Before dawn could even touch Red Hollow, Ethan Cole heard the death clock start ticking. It was not a ticking sound. It was the sound of Caleb Rusk's horse galloping toward Mercy Ridge. It was not the sound of church bells. It was the sound of a detonator in the pocket of a man ready to bury dozens of people alive under the mine. And it was not the sound of prayers. It was the sound of Clara Hayes's rifle firing right behind Ethan, shattering the storm lantern on the saddle of a black Viper, pursuing closely behind. The darkness exploded into small shards of fire. The rider behind screamed, lost control, and then both man and horse plunged down the rocky roadside. Clara reined in her horse, her saloon dress torn on one side by the wind and dust, her hair coming loose from its pins, her eyes shining in the night. "Ethan." Ethan did not turn his head. "What?" "You said we were going to get the detonator. You did not say we would drag all of hell behind us." Ethan crouched low on his horse's back, dodging a bullet that had just whistled past his shoulder. "In Red Hollow, that is the exact same thing." Behind them, the three remaining Black Viper gunmen galloped through the night dust, their guns raised high, howling like starving wolves. Ahead, Caleb Rusk was nothing but one dark silhouette on the road leading up to Mercy Ridge. If Caleb reached the mine before dawn, if he laid his hands on the detonator, if what Deputy Henry Shaw said was true, then the entire truth about Cornelius Vale would disappear in fire, rock, and human corpses. Welcome back. Tonight we ride with Ethan Cole into the pre-dawn hunt, where a sheriff's badge has been sold out, an abandoned silver mine is hiding the living, and one single bullet could decide whether the entire town of Red Hollow will be saved or buried forever. The road up to Mercy Ridge was not made for chases. It was narrow, steep, filled with sharp rocks and curves so sharp that just one slip of the foot would be enough to send both man and horse falling into the ravine. Ethan knew this road. 7 years ago, he had traveled through here, not to save anyone, but to run away from a past that was still smoking behind him. Clara rode alongside him for a few seconds. "You have been to Mercy Ridge before?" Ethan looked at the cliff ahead. "Yes." "When?" "Before the mine was closed. Before Ash Creek." Ethan remained silent. That was the answer. Clara looked at him in the pale moonlight. "Does the Ash Creek incident have something to do with Mercy Ridge?" Ethan tightened his grip on the reins. "Everything in this land is connected to something that is already dead." One gunshot rang out from behind. Clara instantly twisted in her saddle, raising her rifle. "Get down!" Ethan crouched low. Clara fired. One Black Viper behind them was shot in the hat. The hat flew off his head, causing him to panic and rein in his horse. The man next to him sneered, but Clara had already reloaded. The second shot hit the saddle strap. That man tumbled off his horse, falling into the dust. Ethan glanced at her. "You said you do not miss." Clara was breathing heavily, but still smiled coldly. "I did not say I always had to shoot at the person." There was still one last man chasing them. He ducked low, drew his revolver and aimed at Clara's back. Ethan saw the glint of metal in the darkness. He drew his Colt with his left hand, without turning around, without aiming for long, just listening. The sound of hooves, the sound of breathing, the sound of metal scraping. As the other man raised his gun, Ethan fired backward. The Black Viper's gun flew out of his hand. He looked in horror at his empty hand. Ethan turned his head, his voice as cold as stone. "Go back and tell Caleb." The other man trembled. "Tell him what?" "Tell him that he is not riding fast enough." The Black Viper immediately reined in his horse, turning around to flee back to Red Hollow. Clara looked at Ethan. "You let him live on purpose?" "Yes." "Why?" Ethan looked ahead. "Rumors run faster than horses. I need Red Hollow to know that Caleb is no longer the only one hunting." Ahead, the road split into two branches. One wide branch led straight to the main gate of Mercy Ridge. One narrow branch hugged the eastern cliff, leading up to an auxiliary tunnel, once used to bring ore down to the wagons. Caleb chose the main road. Ethan steered his horse toward the narrow branch. Clara quickly followed. Caleb went that way. I know. Then why are we going this way? Because Caleb wants us to see him go that way. Clara frowned. You think it is a trap? Ethan did not answer immediately. He merely pointed up at the cliff on the left. Clara followed his gaze. In the darkness, it was very hard to see, but looking closely, there were a few small bright spots flashing and then disappearing. They were not stars. They were the glowing ends of cigarettes. People were waiting up high. Clara inhaled sharply. They are setting an ambush on the main road. Ethan nodded. Caleb is loud, but not stupid. And what about the side tunnel? Few people know about it. And you know it? Ethan looked at the dark mountain range ahead. I once buried a friend there. Clara asked no further questions. There were answers in the West where, if you dug too deep, what was revealed was not the truth, but pain. While Ethan and Clara disappeared into the side road, Red Hollow behind them was waking up in fear. At the old church, Miles Avery was helping Deputy Henry Shaw lie down on a long bench. Tommy Reed stood by the window, his eyes glued to the half-burned sheriff's office. Miles tore one piece of cloth, pressing it against the wound on Henry's shoulder. You have to stay awake. If Ethan comes back and you die in my arms, he will look at me with that terrifying silence of his. Henry breathed with difficulty. You are old, Miles. Thank you. I am trying to forget that. Tommy said quietly from the window, Someone is coming. Miles immediately grabbed the shotgun, hanging on the church wall. Henry tried to sit up. Who is it? Tommy squinted. Sheriff Briggs. The air in the church instantly froze. Miles stepped toward the door. Is he alone? Tommy shook his head. No, there are 2 Black Viper men. Henry gritted his teeth. Briggs. Miles cocked the shotgun. Tommy looked at him. Do you know how to use that? Miles replied. I used to hunt rabbits. Tommy looked out the door. Those are not rabbits. Miles swallowed hard. I know. Rabbits rarely shoot back. The church doors opened. Walter Briggs stepped in. The badge still shone on his chest, even though his coat was stained with smoke from the chaos at the sheriff's office. Behind him were 2 Black Viper men. Miles raised the shotgun. Stand still. Briggs looked at him with a tired expression. Miles, put the gun down. You are going to hurt yourself. Miles replied, Maybe, but before that happens, I am going to blow one hole in you. Briggs looked around the church. Henry Shaw was lying on the bench. Tommy was standing against the wall. A few Red Hollow townspeople were cowering in the back pews. Briggs said, I came for the boy. Tommy stiffened. Miles stepped in front to block him. No. Briggs sighed. Do not make this any harder than it has to be. Henry struggled to sit up, his voice weak but full of anger. How much did you sell your badge for, Walter? Briggs turned to him. Less than the price you paid for stupidity. Henry let out a hoarse laugh. At least I can still look myself in the mirror. That sentence struck a nerve with Briggs. For one moment the sheriff's face twitched, but one Black Viper man behind him stepped up, growling, Vale wants the kid. Orders are orders. Miles looked at Briggs. Do you hear that? You are no longer the sheriff. You are just the man who opens the door to let the dogs into the house. The Black Viper drew his gun. Old man. Briggs grabbed his hand. No shooting in the church. The man glared. You do not give me orders. Briggs looked at him. I said no shooting in the church. A tense silence fell over them. Tommy observed everything. The boy did not have a gun, but he had what Ethan had praised, brains. Tommy looked up at the church bell rope hanging on the left. Then he looked at the large candle stand near the door. He slowly took one step back. No one noticed. No one except Henry. Henry looked at Tommy. Very slightly. He nodded. Briggs turned back to Miles. "Hand over the boy. He has seen too much." Miles tightened his grip on the shotgun. "Then he needs to live even more." The second Black Viper lost his patience and lunged forward. Tommy instantly yanked the bell rope hard. The sound slammed into everyone's ears. The two Black Viper men flinched. Miles fired. The gunshot did not hit anyone, but it shattered the candle stand in front, spilling fire and hot wax onto the floor. One Black Viper yelled out and stumbled backward. Henry lunged forward with whatever strength he had left, wrapping his arms around the man's legs. Tommy ran through the rows of pews. Briggs raised his gun but hesitated. Tommy ran right past him. Their eyes met. In the boy's eyes there was not only fear, there was also judgment. Briggs did not shoot. Tommy dashed out the back door of the church, disappearing into the darkness. The Black Viper yelled furiously, "You let him run!" Briggs stared at the swinging back door. "Go after him!" The man roared. "No, you go after him!" Briggs slowly turned around. "Be careful how you speak to me." The Black Viper spat on the church floor. "You are just a dirty badge that Vale has not bothered to throw away yet." Briggs looked at him, very slowly, very coldly. Then he raised his gun and shot the man in the leg. Everyone in the church was stunned. Briggs lowered his gun. "I told you, no shooting in the church, unless someone disrespects it." Miles did not lower his shotgun. "What are you doing, Walter?" Briggs looked at Miles. In his eyes lay the exhaustion of a man who had betrayed others for so long that he no longer remembered who he used to be. "I do not know anymore." At Mercy Ridge, Ethan and Clara tied their horses in a wind-sheltered rocky crevice. Before them was the entrance to the auxiliary tunnel. The tunnel door was boarded up with rotten planks and old iron chains, but there were fresh footprints on the ground, many footprints. Clara knelt to inspect them. "People have gone in and out recently." Ethan nodded. "Not just people." He pointed at the small wheel tracks in the dirt. "Cargo carts." Clara peered into the darkness behind the planks. "If there are explosives in there, us going in is no different from crawling into the muzzle of a gun." Ethan unwrapped the cloth around his hand and gently pushed the plank. "At least a gun's muzzle has an exit." Clara looked at him. "Do you always say those kinds of reassuring things?" "No, usually I just stay quiet. It is hard to believe you do not have many friends." Ethan paused for one beat. "I used to." Clara realized she had just touched upon something. "The person you buried here?" Ethan pulled the final plank to one side. "Sam Whitaker. Best friend? Brother. How did he die?" Ethan looked into the pitch-black tunnel. "Trusted the wrong man wearing a badge." Clara went silent. That sentence made the episode title feel as heavy as lead. The dirty badge. The dirty badge was not just the piece of metal on Briggs's chest. It was an entire system that had rotted away. A place where good people had to hide in churches, where the mail carrier died on a saloon floor, and where children learned how to run before they learned how to trust. Ethan held her hand back. "No lights. It is pitch black in there." "Exactly. So if anyone is inside, they will need lights too. We will see them first." Clara exhaled. "You have done this many times before. Too many." They stepped into the tunnel. Mercy Ridge did not feel like an abandoned mine. An abandoned mine has the scent of death, the scent of rotting wood, the scent of stagnant air. But here, there was the smell of machine oil, the smell of gunpowder, the smell of human sweat, and deeper inside, there was the sound of chains, very faint, very far away. Clara stopped. "Do you hear that?" Ethan nodded. "There are people down here." They went deeper. White chalk markings appeared on the rock walls. Arrows, X marks, and one small letter, Vale. Clara whispered, "Vale is marking the path." Ethan touched one X mark. "No, These are explosive counting marks. Clara stiffened. How many are there? Ethan looked down the long tunnel extending before them. Enough to bring down the whole mountain. Suddenly, there was a light from afar. The two immediately pressed themselves against the wall. A group of 3 guards walked past the intersection ahead, but they were not wearing black Viper coats. Their coats were cleaner, their guns newer, their boots better. On their collars were brass buttons engraved with the letters VRC, Vale Rail Company. One man complained as he walked. Caleb said to prepare the eastern fuses. Detonation is at dawn. The second man said, What about the people in the lower tunnel? Bury them as well. Who told them to refuse to sign the land deed? The third man laughed. Dead people can sign with dust just fine. Clara tightened her grip on her gun. Ethan placed his hand on hers, shaking his head. It was not the time yet. The 3 guards walked away. Clara whispered, her voice trembling with anger. They are actually keeping townspeople down here. Ethan said, Then we need to find them before we find Caleb. But the detonator, if we cannot save the people, taking the detonator is meaningless. Clara looked at him. In the dim light, the man before her did not look like the murderous legend that Red Hollow rumors made him out to be. He looked like someone who was too accustomed to death, yet still had not learned how to abandon the living. They turned into the left tunnel passage, following the sound of chains. The sound grew clearer. At the end of the path was one wide tunnel chamber, blocked off by makeshift iron bars. Inside were more than 20 people. Men, women, 1 old man, 2 teenagers. All were emaciated, filthy, their eyes blinded when they saw Ethan's silhouette. One gray-bearded man crawled up to the iron bars. Please! Clara covered her mouth. Oh my God! Ethan stepped forward. Who holds the keys? The gray-bearded man answered. Foreman Vale, but he does not come down here anymore. We heard them say, today is the last day. Ethan took out the key he got from Daniel's box. He inserted it into the padlock. It did not fit. Clara asked, It will not open. Ethan looked at the lock. No. He took 1 step back. Step away from the door. The people inside hurriedly backed away. Ethan aimed at the padlock. The lock shattered. The door swung open. The imprisoned people did not dare to run immediately. They looked at Ethan in disbelief that freedom could appear in the form of one dust-covered gunslinger. Clara stepped in. Go, quickly. The auxiliary tunnel entrance behind us is still open. The gray-bearded man grabbed Ethan's hand. What about the people in the lower tunnel? Ethan turned around. There are more? The man nodded. 10, maybe 12 people. They were taken down to the north tunnel last night. Among them is one woman named Grace Morgan. Clara instantly looked at Ethan. Grace Morgan, Ethan asked. You know her? The widow of mine owner Morgan. People say she left Red Hollow after her husband was killed. The gray-bearded man shook his head. No, she did not leave. She was captured because she found Vale's debt ledger. Ethan looked toward the north tunnel. The story was becoming clearer by the minute. Vale was not just stealing land. He was erasing everyone who knew the truth. And then, he called it progress. Clara turned around. Someone is coming. Ethan told the captive group. Follow the path we came in from. Stay quiet. Stick to the walls. If you come across horses, just take them and ride to Red Hollow. The gray-bearded man asked, What about you? Ethan reloaded his gun. I still have business down deep. Clara looked at him. We still have business. Ethan did not object anymore. There was no time. They had just managed to hide behind the ore carts when 4 VRC guards ran into the holding cell area. One guard saw the broken padlock and instantly shouted, The prisoners have escaped! Ethan shot out their lanterns. Clara fired right after. In the chaotic darkness, Ethan lunged out like one shadow. He struck the first man down with his gun butt, kicked the second man into one ore cart, and then used his elbow to take down the third. The final man fled in panic toward the main tunnel. Clara raised her gun. Ethan said, "Let him run." Clara lowered her weapon. "You are letting the messenger live again?" "No." Ethan watched the man's retreating silhouette. "I am letting him lead us to Caleb." The Viercy guard sprinted through the tunnels, so panicked that he did not realize he was dragging two figures behind him. Ethan and Clara kept their distance. Past one intersection, a red light appeared. The north tunnel. There, explosives were stacked along the support pillars. Slow-burning fuses ran like black snakes across the ground, and in the middle of the large chamber, Caleb Rusk was standing next to one wooden crate containing the detonator. Beside him was Grace Morgan. Her two hands were tied. Her face was covered in dust, but her eyes were as sharp as knives. Caleb held one gun pointed at her head. "Ethan Cole!" His voice echoed throughout the mountain's core. "I know you are here. You always like to step into places where others lay traps." Ethan stopped in the shadows. Clara stood behind one ore cart, looking at Grace. Caleb laughed. "Come out, or I will start with this widow." Grace Morgan did not tremble in the slightest. She stared into the darkness and said loudly, "If you are Ethan Cole, do not do anything stupid." Caleb smirked. "Brave. But bravery only makes one corpse look better." Ethan stepped out. Caleb's smile grew wider. "There he is, the Ash gunman." Ethan looked around. 6 VRC guards, 2 Black Viper men, explosives everywhere, Grace-bound. Clara still hidden in the dark. Not one loss yet, but not one survival yet either. Ethan asked, "Where is the detonator?" Caleb patted his pocket. "Right here. Give it to me." Caleb burst out laughing. "You think this is a negotiation?" "No." Ethan looked straight at him. "I think you talk too much when you are scared." Caleb stopped laughing. The guards tightened their grips on their guns. Caleb took one step forward. "I am scared of you," Ethan said. "No, you are scared of Vale." That struck home. Caleb gritted his teeth. "Vale is the only one who understands what this land needs. Money, order." Ethan looked at the bound people deeper in the tunnel. "His order requires too many corpses." Caleb pressed the gun harder against Grace. "Drop the gun." Ethan did not move. Caleb growled, "I said drop the gun." Grace said coldly, "Go ahead and shoot me, but if I die, you lose what Vale wants." Caleb glanced at her. "You think you are that important?" Grace let out one soft laugh. "No, but my ledger is." Ethan looked at her. Grace continued, "Vale did not just buy Sheriff Briggs. He bought the judge, the banker, the stagecoach company, and 2 territorial senators. I know the names, I know the amounts, I know the dates." Caleb squeezed her wrist tightly. "Shut your mouth." Grace looked at Ethan. "And I know that you were not the one who started Ash Creek." The air in the tunnel felt as if it had been drained away. Ethan froze. Caleb looked at her too. "What did you say?" Grace continued, her voice louder. "Ash Creek was Vale's first clearing operation. That town sat on the railroad route he wanted, but the people refused to sell, so he hired gunmen, planted evidence, and pinned the whole crime on Ethan Cole." Ethan stared at Grace. In his eyes there was no surprise, only an old pain that had just been called by its true name. Caleb shouted, "Shut up!" But his very panic created one opening. Clara fired from the darkness. The bullet hit the ropes tying Grace's hands. Grace immediately elbowed Caleb in the face, twisted around and rolled to one side. Ethan drew his gun. Everything shattered into chaos. Bullets struck rock, creating dangerous sparks near the crates of explosives. Ethan did not shoot Caleb. He shot the hands of the men standing near the fuses. Clara shifted her position behind the ore cart, each shot forcing one guard to duck. Grace picked up one dropped gun from the ground. Despite her wrists still aching from being tied, and shot down the lantern near the Black Viper group. Caleb backed away toward the detonator crate. Ethan saw him. He lunged forward. One VRC man blocked his path, swinging one knife. Ethan dodged to the side, struck the man's wrist with his gun butt, and rammed his shoulder into him, sending him tumbling into the ore cart. The ore cart slipped off its latch. It began to roll, slowly, then fast, straight toward the pile of explosives. Clara screamed, "Ethan!" Ethan turned back, sprinting to pull the old rail switch lever. The ore cart veered off course by just one hair's breadth, crashing into the rock wall instead of the explosives. The entire tunnel shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Caleb snatched the detonator. He laughed maniacally. "Stop! Everyone stop!" Everyone froze. In Caleb's hands was the detonator. His finger rested on the trigger lever. Just one motion. Mercy Ridge would become a tomb. Caleb looked at Ethan. "Vale wants you alive, but I'm not so sure I care what Vale wants anymore." Ethan slowly lowered his gun. "Caleb, do not talk to me as if you understand me. I do not understand you." Ethan stepped closer slowly. "But I understand men like Vale." Caleb gave one twisted smile. "No, you do not understand. Vale picked me out of the mud, gave me a gun, gave me a name, gave me the power to make other people afraid." Ethan said, "He did not give you power. He gave you one longer leash." Caleb shook with anger. Grace stood on the left, gun in hand, but not daring to shoot. Clara was on the right, her eyes searching for one shooting angle. No one had a clean shot. Ethan looked at Caleb. Briggs also thought he was choosing one way to survive. Now, he is just one dirty badge that your men laugh in the face of. Caleb snarled, "Briggs is weak." "No, Briggs was weak, but you are hollow." That sentence drove Caleb mad. He yanked the detonator lever, but before his hand could pull it down, one gunshot echoed from the tunnel entrance. The bullet struck Caleb's hand. He screamed. The detonator fell to the ground. Ethan lunged forward and kicked it far away. Caleb clutched his hand, collapsing to his knees. Everyone turned toward the gunshot. At the tunnel entrance stood Walter Briggs. Smoke rose from the barrel of his gun. Behind him was Tommy Reed panting, his face covered in dust. Clara was stunned. "Sheriff!" Briggs stepped into the tunnel. His gaze fell on Caleb, then on the captives, the explosives, the fuses, and his own badge reflecting in a dirty puddle at his feet. Caleb gritted his teeth. "You betrayed Vale." Briggs slowly unpinned the badge from his chest. He looked at it for one long time. Then he tossed it onto the stone floor. "No," Briggs said hoarsely. "I betrayed him from the first day I took the money. Today I just stopped lying to myself." Ethan looked at him. "What are you doing here?" Briggs replied. "The boy led me." Tommy stood behind him, trying to act brave. "I thought if he still had any good left in him, he should use it before it is too late." Briggs looked at Tommy, pained. "This boy has more guts than our entire town." Caleb laughed disdainfully. "Beautiful. The sheriff finds his conscience again, but it is too late." He whistled. From the tunnel behind him, the sound of old machinery suddenly groaned to life. Grace turned pale. "No," Ethan asked. "What is it?" Grace stared into the deep tunnel. "The cave-in mechanism. This mine has one emergency collapse system from back when it was operational." Briggs looked at Caleb. "You triggered it?" Caleb smiled, blood dripping from his hand. "You do not need a detonator to bury people under a mine. The detonator only gets it done faster." The tunnel ceiling shook violently. Ethan yelled, "Everyone get out!" Clara grabbed Grace. Briggs bent down to pick up the detonator and shoved it into his pocket. Ethan grabbed Caleb. Caleb tried to break free. "Let me go!" Ethan knocked him unconscious instantly with one punch. "Keep your mouth shut and you live longer." The whole group ran through the tunnel as the mountain started collapsing behind them. The captives from above had almost all escaped, but one support pillar snapped and crashed down, trapping one teenager behind. He screamed, "Mom!" Ethan stopped. Clara turned her head. "Ethan, no!" Ethan dashed back toward the fallen pillar. Briggs watched him, then cursed. He rushed in as well. The two men hoisted the heavy wooden pillar together. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Pull the boy out!" Clara and Grace grabbed the teenager together, pulling him out of the narrow gap. The moment he was free, the entire ceiling behind them collapsed. Dust swallowed everything. For a few seconds, no one saw anything. No one heard anything besides the sound of rolling rocks. Then Clara coughed violently. "Ethan!" There was no answer. "Ethan!" One hand reached out from the layer of dust. Ethan stepped out, his coat torn, his face covered in dirt, his eyes still sharp. Right behind him was Briggs, stumbling, his shoulder having been hit by falling rocks. Tommy ran up to support him. Briggs looked at Tommy. "I am fine," Tommy replied. "You are a terrible liar." Briggs let out a hoarse laugh, then winced in pain. They kept running. Finally, the grayish-blue light of the pre-dawn appeared at the auxiliary tunnel opening. One by one, they escaped outside. The former captives collapsed to the ground, hugging each other and crying. Clara stood next to Grace, both of them gazing at Red Hollow in the distance. Ethan dragged Caleb Rusk out of the tunnel and threw him onto the ground. Briggs emerged last. He held the detonator in his hand. Then, in front of everyone, he dismantled the triggering mechanism and snapped it. Tommy looked at him. "So, it is over." Ethan looked back at Mercy Ridge. One part of the tunnel had collapsed, but the mine had not exploded. The evidence might still be intact. The living had escaped. But Red Hollow was not yet saved. Ethan said, "Not yet." Clara turned to him. "Caleb is captured. The detonator is destroyed. The townspeople are saved. What else is there?" Grace Morgan stepped forward. She dusted off her hands, her eyes cold. "Cornelius Vale." Briggs nodded slowly. "And he will know about this before the sun fully rises." As if to prove his words, one rifle shot rang out from the top of the western hill. The bullet plunged into the dirt right in front of Briggs's feet. Everyone instantly ducked. Ethan looked up at the hilltop. The silhouette of one man on horseback stood amidst the dawn light. Black coat, long rifle. The same man who had shot his own subordinate on Boot Hill. He did not fire a second shot. He merely raised one hand. In his hand was a piece of white cloth bearing the V symbol and a black snake. Then he turned his horse and vanished behind the hill. Clara whispered, "Was that a warning?" Grace looked at Ethan. "No." Ethan picked up the bullet that had just struck the earth. There was one small piece of paper wrapped around the bullet casing. He unrolled it. On the paper was a line of beautifully written text. "Mr. Cole, you have taken my mine. Now I will take your town. Cornelius Vale." Ethan finished reading, his eyes darkening. Clara asked, "What did he write?" Ethan looked toward Red Hollow, where smoke from the saloon and the sheriff's office still rose in the dawn. "It says the war has just begun." Briggs bent down to retrieve his dirty badge from his pocket. He looked at it. Then he handed it to Ethan. "I do not deserve to wear it." Ethan did not take it. "Then do something so that one day you might deserve it." Briggs looked at him. "What do you want me to do?" Ethan looked at Caleb lying unconscious on the ground. "Take him back to Red Hollow. Lock him up. Make everything public to the townsfolk." Briggs asked, "And if the town wants to hang me?" Ethan looked at him point blank. "Then you better hope you saved enough people today for them to hear you out first." Tommy stood next to Briggs. "I will tell them you shot Caleb." Briggs looked at the boy, his voice going hoarse. "Thank you." Tommy shrugged. "I never said I would forgive you." Briggs nodded. "I know." As the sun rose above the red hills, Ethan Cole stood before the entrance of the Mercy Ridge mine, watching the line of survivors begin their walk back to Red Hollow. Beside him was Clara Hayes, the woman Vale wanted captured alive. In front of him was Grace Morgan, the widow carrying a list of bought men in her head. Behind him was Sheriff Walter Briggs, the man who had sold his badge and now had to dig it back out of the mud himself. And somewhere out there, Cornelius Vale had realized that Red Hollow would no longer bow down as easily as before. Ethan put his hat back on. Clara asked, "What do you think Vale will do?" Ethan looked down the long road leading back to town. He already said it. "Take Red Hollow?" Ethan nodded. Grace loaded her gun. "Then we have to get there before him." Briggs looked at Ethan. "Cole." Ethan turned around. Briggs said, "I know you do not trust me." "Correct. But I know where Vale's office is, and I know the one person in town who still wires money to him." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Briggs looked toward Red Hollow. "The bank." Clara softly swore. Grace said coldly, "So every bullet fired at us was paid for by the townspeople's deposits." Ethan looked at the rising sun. Not for much longer. Tommy walked up next to Ethan. "Mr. Cole." "What? Do you think this town can still be saved?" Ethan stayed silent. Red Hollow in the distance looked small, frail, and full of smoke, but it still stood there, like one man knocked down many times but still refusing to die. Ethan said, "Yes." Tommy looked at him. "Why?" Ethan looked at the boy. "Because there are still people asking that question." And so they returned to Red Hollow, not as fugitives but as people carrying the truth. A truth heavy enough to break a coward's back, sharp enough to cut away the mask of the powerful, and dangerous enough to force Cornelius Vale to strike before the whole town awakened. But at the doors of the Red Hollow Bank, just as the sun rose, one man in a gray suit stood waiting. In his hand was a silver-tipped cane. On his lips was a polite smile. Behind him 2 gunmen stood on either side of the door. Clara saw him first. "Ethan." Ethan halted his horse. The man in the gray suit tipped his hat in greeting. "Mr. Cole." Grace tightened her grip on her gun. Briggs turned pale. Tommy whispered, "Who is that?" The man's smile broadened. "Allow me to introduce myself." He stepped down the bank stairs. "Cornelius Vale. If today's story made you feel every hoofbeat, every gunshot, and every secret beneath the mine pulling you into Red Hollow, please subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow, we will step into the next episode. Cornelius Vale has appeared. Sheriff Briggs has been exposed. Grace Morgan holds the secret that could destroy an entire railroad empire. And Ethan Cole will have to face a man who can bring a whole town to its knees without even drawing a gun. Leave a comment to let us know. Do you think Cornelius Vale will use money, the law, or blood to reclaim Red Hollow? Do not forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Because in this Wild West, not every badge represents justice, and not every cleanly suited man has hands clear of blood.